Testing, testing. Does this project? Yeah. some enchanted evening. No, that didn't have the effect I was hoping for. Can everybody hear me? it's like it's like I'm trying to call the attention of, I don't know, people in my family. You know, it's not always easy. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone. Shavuot Sameach. My name is David. I am the lucky invitee of Rabbi Walden, a guy that I've known as Michael for a long time because he used to work in the Hillel, where I work. I don't work at Hillel, but I work at the University of Arizona. I want to thank you for being here on such a warm day. I was asked to give 2 talks. The first one has to do, actually, Kristen, your plenipotentiary shul manager, had the absolutely brilliant idea of calling this Ledor Vedont, which is the best title for any talk that I've ever given. But I have to tell you, I don't really want to frame things negatively. I don't think that's a good approach. I don't want to say don't. You know, there's so much normativity that I think we can do without that. Mostly what I want to do is just stimulate you, and then perhaps in conversation with you guys, you can extract some do's as opposed to don'ts. Okay? So just a thought. And by the way, I'm going to try something that I don't normally do, which is to take questions and comments as I go. Okay? I set my my phone, my all-knowing phone, to chime at about 45 minutes, so I know, when I should really break this completely open. If I feel that I'm not getting through the material because your questions are just so engaging and what have you, I'll say, okay, let's wait till the end, okay? So thank you all again for being here. All right, so this is a Reform shul, so it won't be a problem if I start this, and then it has a horrible sound. All right, so this talk is about, theoretically, what not to tell the next generations about being Jewish. And really, it's not about what not to say, but it's about identity. Yeah, and I'm not going to dictate what you should say. I'm just going to lay out some ideas, and hopefully they will be stimulating such that you can think constructively about what it means to talk to younger people. And by younger people, I mean literally anybody who's younger than you by more than, let's say, 5 years. Oh, by the way, this is my contact information. If you, let's see, does this work? No, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, you can always contact me. If you don't write this down or don't remember, it's okay. Just talk to Michael and he'll put you in touch with me. Okay, so let me start with a couple. Yes. Yes. The University of Arizona has a department called the Center for Jewish Studies, the Arizona Center for Jewish Studies. I'm part of that. So I'm a historian by training. So we have, it's a multidisciplinary center. We have a journalist, a legal scholar. Until some recent retirements, we had a philologist of the ancient Near East, an archaeologist of the ancient Near East, another historian, linguist, etc. So, yeah. Let me start with some ideas that may be familiar to you. You tell me how familiar they are. Maybe they're not. But anyway, I think public discourse, including public discourse among Jews, tends to confirm the notion that Jews are the professors, let's say the inheritors, the carriers of something called a religion, right? And that that religion consists of a certain body of theological propositions and very often rituals of worship, especially of God worship, that are supposed to, in some sense, actualize or do justice to those theological propositions, alongside some ethics that supposedly follow from the core principles, right? Another point that's, I think, very, common is that this religion is called Judaism. I hear many, many proud, educated Jews refer to their culture as Judaism. And at the same time, I think many Jews in the United States, at least, also in North America, Europe, etc., have, embraced this other term, peoplehood. Yeah, this is the idea that Jews constitute a people, whatever that means, and not simply a group that professes a particular religion or faith, to use a Protestant term that's really made current by Protestantism. At the same time that Jews understand themselves in the United States as having a peoplehood quality and a religious quality, they also they also are conscious of the fact that there are Jews who actually do not profess any religion. They say we are culturally Jewish or something like that, and we don't believe in X, right? Or we don't practice X. Now, this is all well and good, but I think we all know at some level that the historical experience of being Jewish is actually more complex than what I've just outlined. First, we have to, I mean, this is where I start. It's clear to me, at least, that the very notion of religion is essentially a Roman notion that was translated into Christian terms once the Roman Empire became Christian. Religio is a Latin word. It's a Roman word that means something like governmentally sanctioned or at least accepted worship. Yeah. Now, the term Judaism itself happens not to be a Jewish term. I think this is very important. Judaism is English for the Greek Judaismos, which is a term that the Greek empire builders, Alexander the Great and his cronies, the term that they assigned to the Judeans, to the Judean Israelites when they conquered the area that is now, well, that traditionally we call Eretz Israel, and that is part of the Levant. What does this mean? Well, to the Greeks, Judaismos meant something like the whole gamut of beliefs, practices, the way of life of the Judeans. Okay? So to the extent that we use this term, I think we use it to make ourselves, historically, we've used it to make ourselves legible to non-Jews. I mean, in Hebrew, it's not called Yahadut. That's actually a modern Hebrew term, which serves to translate Judaism, but it's not a traditional term. Anyway, as Jews have experienced their culture, I think they've experienced it as a comprehensive culture, as a comprehensive civilization. And by civilization, I mean something like a family of related cultures that make sense and that have a certain continuity amongst each other, such that people in North Africa can recognize what's happening among their fellows in, England or something like that, right? So, here comes Michael. This civilization, as I like to call it, I and others like to call it, is comprehensive in the sense that it does not recognize a religious sphere of experience and a secular sphere of experience. This is a dualistic, fundamentally Greek notion that comes from the idea that all reality is broken up into form and matter in Greek philosophical terms. In other words, the spiritual and the abstract and the concrete and the finite, But really, a traditional Jewish culture does not even conceive of these areas. We can talk about the holy and the common or the ordinary, that is, that which is called kadosh, and that which is called chol, ordinary or everyday, right? But we can't really speak of the secular versus the religious. Now, in traditional Jewish culture, there's also something very important called a kehillah. Anybody care to define this term? What's a kehillah? Yes, very much so. A community, specifically, this is shorthand for kehillah kedosha, right? A holy community, a normatively organized community that's run, at least in theory, according to halakha, which means what? You've heard this word. Sorry? Yes, exactly. Who said the way to go? Very good. Mr. Bamberger is right. It's not just Jewish law, as it's usually translated. It's actually something that conveys a manner of procedure, right? The way to go about doing X, Y, and Z. So the kehillah is at least idealized as the ideal place within which Judean Israelites, are supposed to realize their entire culture. There's no such thing in traditional Jewish terms as living your life as a hermit and being perfectly Jewish. No, There's no such thing. Realistically, yes, Jews have lived together, right? But that's parcel of the dynamics and the content of halakha, which in a sense causes people to live together and to fulfill their functions in a social environment. Okay, now belonging to a kehila, kdosha, has less to do with belief, yes, which is a key to a Christian definition of religion, than it has to do with kinship. Even in halachic terms, yes? What do I mean by this? If you are a Christian mostly because you believe in certain theological propositions, right? You can be a Christian in Nigeria, let's say. You're ethnically Nigerian, right? You're also a Christian because you believe that there was a guy who looked like a member of Lynyrd Skynyrd who was cool, and he saved everybody, or he atoned for everybody's sins and whatever. I don't need to make light of it. It's a very powerful story, but the point is, believing in this fellow and in his mission as described to you by the intellectuals, that makes you a Christian. And it causes you to identify with a Christian who is not a Nigerian by ethnicity, might be, let's say, a Finn by ethnicity, right? What makes you Christian, both of you, recognizable to each other, is belief and the practices that follow from those beliefs. In halachic terms, that's not what makes a Jew Jewish. You don't have to, you have to believe in X. Or, think of Islam, right? Islam is basically a way of life that's premised on the idea that there was a guy who went to a cave and he received their revelation. So the Quran is there to tell you, hey, believe that this guy went to a cave and received the truth with a capital T. Okay, believe it. And if you believe it, then you're a Muslim. Yes? Not so with Jewish life. Not so with traditional Judean culture. What we have is, again, a comprehensive civilization which is fundamentally based on kinship. Now, I'm not just referring to the matrilineal definition of Israeliteness as defined by halakha. I'm really talking about sociological reality. Jews are Jews or have been Jews because they've been born into families in which the members regard themselves as Jews, and they are so regarded by other Jews. Yes? In other words, it's a very simple, you might say natural extension of living in a kehila, whether it's formal or informal like this one. And I say this is informal, not because you're not a formal shul, but because it's not called a kehila often. It really stands for the pre-modern structure of a kehila, which is governed by some, stern-looking dudes with beards and, so forth, who hire. Anyway. The point, why isn't anybody laughing at my stupid jokes? I don't know. Thank you. It's very game of you. So kinship, not belief, is what in many ways defines being Jewish, even in halachic terms. Halakha does not dictate, believe in this. Halakha says, look, there's a contract here. Actually, there are a couple of contracts, right? There's the Abrahamic compact, there's the Sinaitic compact, then there's you might say the Zion compact that was forged between God and the Davidic line, the Davidic monarchical line. So according to those contracts, we have to do X. You don't want to do X? Well, you're lax. But in halachic terms, you don't cease to be part of the clan. And by the way, this idea is not dependent upon knowledge of genealogy. It's not like Jews throughout the centuries have had a laminated card in the back of their pockets that show their descent from Mother Sarah or from any Jewish woman, okay? The idea is, again, you're born into a Jewish community, or you are publicly and consciously integrating yourself into that community as a quote-unquote convert. Not really a convert, you're really more like a naturalized member. Giyur, which stands for conversion, it's not really conversion, it's a kind of, from the Hebrew, it stands for dwelling with, right? So you become a dweller with Israel by undergoing a certain re-education. It's kind of a social adaptation. Okay. So again, kinship, not belief, is primary. How are we doing so far? Okay, great. All right. It's a matter of, you might say, sociological or social scientific, consensus that Jews have long constituted an ethno-national group. The Jews are really not Jews. This is a King James term. They're Judeans, right? They're Judahites. They're people from Judah, or who, have inherited the culture of Judah. And as such, they function as an ethno-national group. We'll talk about these terms in a moment. Again, kinship, not faith, is what determines an Israelite, yeah? And this is enshrined in a lot of rabbinic statements, like, although he sins, he is Israel. In other words, he may be a Christian polemicist against the Jews, but, according to our terms, because he came from our community, he is Israel. Okay. Another point to emphasize is that in many ways, the civilization of the Judeans, the Judean Israelites, is public by definition. Just as a kehillah is the ideal locus of fulfillment, so too the behaviors that convey Jewish identification are meant to be public. There is very little in traditional Jewish culture which says, oh, you have to hold this in your heart. You have to know that your spirit is, dyed with Jewish coloring, and what goes on outside is, your behavior in public is not, or cannot, or should not be, or you can afford not to show this. No, the idea is that being a Jew is a public quality. Not only that, but it's a very collective quality. Think, for example, of the Christian, garden variety notions of Christian salvation versus Jewish redemption, Geula. Okay, so if you drive around my town in Tucson, you'll see a lot of big signs that say something to the effect of, Jesus is the way, Jesus is salvation. Take Jesus into your heart and become a personal friend of Jesus, and you will be saved. Yeah? Okay, and so the question arises in my head, where? Saved where? Like, what does that look like? According to the Apostle Paul, this happens very much in an ethereal realm, in the heavens, up above, right? All right, is that the way it works for Jews? I don't think so. What does Geula, what does, let's say, the messianic redemption look like in your, as far as you've been able to absorb notions of this? What happens? Oh my God, we're all redeemed. Huh? You go to heaven? No. No, not really. Yeah? Okay, so the question is, who says that you go to heaven? The Christians do. But I'm saying, what do Jews say? Yeah, that's the question. Of course, the Christians will tell you, yes, salvation means you leave your body behind, and your soul is the one that gets saved. Okay, but traditional notions of Jewish redemption are actually about, and you said, living a good life here. So wait a minute. So you're saying that if you live a good life here, you're redeemed? Like, does that like finalize the redemption of Israel? Let's say you yourself, you're a good Jew. You do what's right. You observe mitzvot. You follow the ethics that the halakha teaches. Okay, therefore there's collective redemption. There's group redemption. No, what does redemption look like? No, I mean you may have a personal redemption, yes, but not a collective redemption. What does the Messianic era promise? Peace? Peace? Okay, so all the Jews will stick to their homes in the United States and live in peace. Is that what it looks like?
The original definition was that the Davidic Messiah would come and create peace and harmony in the whole.
Okay. The Davidic Messiah will show up and he will rule in peace. He will not create peace, but he will rule in peace from Eretz Israel. And the rest of us, we're supposed to stick around in Los Gatos. Yes?
No, we're supposed to go back to Israel and build the temple.
Exactly. Or, according to some views, the temple is supposed to somehow descend from the heavens and, it be established. What happens to the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Don't ask. Okay, but the point is, this is something that's supposed to be right? A collective event, collective repatriation in this world, not in the heavens, but here. The Davidic Messiah is supposed to be a guy, not some angelic being who, you know, with hair that flows almost, you know, like when they, in Hollywood, they have like the fan going, you know. No, he's just a guy, okay? In fact, the personality of this Messiah is not a big point of emphasis within the, let's say, the rabbinic tradition. He's more like the you might say the cherry that descends and that makes the sundae complete, right? The process of redemption is something that has to do with repatriation and has to do with collective life. The collective life of the people is their liberation from diaspora, their liberation from the subjection of Gentiles, okay? That's the traditional notion. Now, another aspect is that this redemption and this fulfillment is to be historical. It's going to happen in history. Again, not in some timeless realm like wherever Lynyrd Skynyrd is playing music in heaven. Identity, therefore, Jewish identity, is not... Yes, go ahead. Uh-huh. So Tchiyat HaMeitim sounds very magical, right? And, you know, Tchiyat HaMeitim means the revival, the realiving of the dead, right? So Tchiyat HaMeitim is a notion that develops in Judean circles over time. Some social groups accept it, some do not. If I were a scholar of it, I would trace these ideas to certain prophecies, right? Most notably that of Ezekiel. Although he didn't say this is literally going to happen, that bones are going to somehow take shape and then they'll develop sinews and muscles and eventually they'll be revived. I don't know. I, for one, read Yechezkel as a metaphor, right? As a symbolic flight of fancy. But you know, eventually the belief does coalesce, does take shape, such that many would argue, among others Rambam, the great Maimonides, that this is a core principle. This is a principle of Jewish belief. Yeah? And notice, he uses words like belief much more freely, partly because he was being influenced by Muslim notions. It is a supernatural part of the redemption. However, the revival occurs so that the revived live here among us. Yes? So in that sense, the historicity of the picture, of the whole picture, remains. Okay? And I'm talking really here about emphases, because look, there are many rabbis who have argued, well, what will redemption actually look like? And the most, let's say, humanistic view is everything will be basically the same. The only difference will be that we'll have a Davidic king, yeah, and we'll all be in the land of Israel. That's one extreme. The other extreme is, whoa, there's going to be a great banquet, and you know, we're all going to feast on the Leviathan, and all that. That is more, let's say, amenable to notions such as Tchiyat HaMeitim. But again, the idea, the emphasis is consistent, that this is something that is historical. By the way, you notice how this is continuous with Jewish politics, right? Especially with certain forms of Jewish nationalism. If redemption is here and now, if redemption doesn't necessarily feature the breaking of the laws of physics, then it stands to reason that Jews can do something in this world right now to better their condition. But I leave that aside for a moment. Okay. So traditionally, Jewish identity is coextensive with social and the social and political status of Jews. However, in the modern era, which those of us who are pedantic historians define as the French Revolution or the Enlightenment onward, something happens. It's a rupture. It's a change. It's a radical change, and it's something that's primarily caused by external forces, not by internal forces. What is that? The rupture occurs because of the entry into Jewish discourse of what I like to call the liberal bargain. Let's see So the liberal bargain has it that in order to be part of non-Jewish societies on equal legal, if not social footing, Jews must improve so that they are fully deserving of civil and political rights. Second, what does that improvement look like? What is it supposed to entail? Well, first, Jews have got to surrender their traditional autonomy, especially their collective identity, right? They can no longer regard themselves as, let's say, an ethno-national group. They have to see themselves as professors of a religion. They have to limit and privatize their culture into what non-Jews define as a religion, right? I should hold this. And this is where the modern non-Jewish idea of Judaism comes from. The most radical and most direct enunciation of the liberal bargain was offered by the Count of Clermont-Tonnerre. You can tell he's a count because of the fancy wig. In the debates that accompanied the formation of the French Republic on the eve of the Revolution. He argued as follows, quote, "The liberal French Republic must refuse everything to the Jews as a nation and accord everything to Jews as individuals. We must refuse legal protection to the maintenance of the so-called laws of their Judaic organization. They should not be allowed to form either a political body or an order." Okay? In other words, collectivity, Jewish collectivity, no. Jewish religious individuality, yes. And so France, the revolutionary government established a network of consistories, which were and still are essentially state-governed and state-supported bodies in which very, very religionized rabbis, appointed by the state, supervise things like, Kabbalat Shabbat and, things like that, the eating of cheesecake and what have you. Now, there is an American version of this liberal bargain, and one of the places in which it is expressed is in a very famous letter that this fellow here, George Washington, wrote to the Jewish congregation of Newport, Rhode Island. You may be familiar with this letter. And to be honest with you, I am in a way, but it wasn't until I was putting these slides together that I noticed a couple of very interesting things. This is what Washington said, or wrote, rather. "The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. Happily, the government of the United States, which gives bigotry no sanction and to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should behave themselves as good citizens. They who live under its protection should behave themselves as good citizens." The good news is, this is, in essence, a de facto grant of citizenship to Jewish men, not to Jewish women, who had to wait until, 1910 or so to get the vote at all. But leaving that aside, it's very interesting that Washington chooses to say that in order to enjoy rights, Jews have to behave themselves. And I asked myself, when he was signing all the documents that institutionally established this country, was he telling his fellow signers, hey, we have to behave ourselves in order to earn our rights? Is this a statement that has ever been issued to any Anglo-Saxon in this country? You better behave yourself to earn your good standing as a citizen. Oh, so wait, there's a condition implicit here, perhaps. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Oops. May the children of the stock of Abraham. Ooh, okay, so this is a definition of Jewishness, which has to do with stock, with origin, yeah? Not so much with belief. Okay, so this is different than what Clermont-Tonnerre was arguing. But anyway, continue. who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while every one shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. Okay, so you recognize the biblical, not allusion, the biblical reference, right? Sitting under your vine and fig tree and so forth. But what is this stuff about to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants? I ask you, are you citizens, if you happen to be citizens of this country, are you a citizen because somebody has given you goodwill? I don't know about you, but I thought that in a liberal democracy, people are created equal, endowed by their creator with inalienable rights, among which is the right to form part of a political community. So either rights are inherent, or they're based on goodwill, the goodwill of non-Jews, in the case of Jews. Now, American history gave rise to a very interesting conception of the polity. Most countries in the world are what are known as ethno-states or nation-states or some such. In other words, the foundational, let's say, structure of these countries like England, Denmark, Finland, Greece, etc., has a lot to do with the ethnic identity of the founding majority. Now, of course, many of these countries that I've mentioned have very diverse populations regardless. Greece has an official religion, Greek Orthodoxy. Ireland has an official religion, Patrick's brand of Christianity, St. Patrick's. I'm not talking about any other. Irish Catholicism, yes. And England, of course, has a head of state who's also the head of the English Church. That's an official religion. Trick question, does Israel have an official religion? It's a trick question. Who says yes? Raise your hand. Who says no? Who says, I have no idea, or you're trying to trick me, you son of a gun? Okay, all right. Really? 45 minutes? Okay, all right. Okay, well, that's because your questions are very good and your contribution is very good. So I would say the following, that Israel gives official sanction to many religions, right? There are state-sponsored Sharia courts in Israel. So too there are state-sponsored rabbinic courts. And I presume state-sponsored canon law courts? I don't know. Courts for Christians. These handle a very narrow set of cases. Cases that have to do with personal status, like marriage, divorce, burial, circumcision in the case of Jews and Muslims, Muslim boys, babies, things of that nature, right? Which, by the way, contravenes halakha altogether, right? Halakha says, halakha is everything. Halakha is weights and measures. Halakha is whose dove is it? If it fell on little Yankel's territory, it's Yankel's, and if the house was in little Shmulik's territory, it's Shmulik's, or whatever. Yeah, exactly, things like that. So, in other words, it's not the kind of law. It's torts, it's criminal laws. Not the kind of law that is supposed to be religious, right? It's everything, because again, traditionally, Jewish culture, Jewish civilization does not distinguish between the secular and the non-secular. Where was I going with this? So Israel, in a sense, has no official religion, although its civic life reflects the ethnicity and the culture of the founding majority, just as in the United States. Did you ever stop to wonder why Christmas, the Mass of Christ, is a federal holiday? Or why, the bank is closed on Easter and nobody wishes you happy Rosh Hashanah, or says, for example, happy Yom Kippur, things like that. It was partly because we're talking about a country that's fundamentally, again, in its civic life, it is influenced, it is deeply informed by Christian notions. Anyway, but as a social experiment, the United States is unique because it is not structured as a nation state. It's structured as a civic democracy, right? Under the banner of e pluribus unum, right? This is the ideal of the melting pot, that out of many, many ethnicities, there shall only be ultimately one that matters. Okay. So many American Jews in the 19th and early 20th century accepted this liberal bargain, this American form of the liberal bargain. And they argued, like the framers of the Pittsburgh Platform of the late 1880s, quote, "We consider ourselves no longer a nation but a religious community, and therefore we expect neither a return to Palestine, nor sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. God hid America in his treasure house to reserve it for the most glorious chapter of human history, when out of the mingling of races, nay, out of the boldest, the most courageous, and the most independent elements of society, a new, stronger, happier type of men and women should emerge." In other words, Jewish particularity is to be rendered in the service of a universal end. And that end is the dissolution, the literal melting of Jewishness into a non-Jewish, a kind of a conglomerate whole. Okay, this is where we start to talk about the main subject. All right, so all of this leads me to the assertion that Jewish religion has been divorced from Jewish nationality in American Jewish life. Now, these are concepts, religion and nationality, that are essentially foreign to Jewish tradition. What do I mean by the divorcing of these? Well, we see a very common notion among many, what you might call liberal Jews, like yours truly, that if you're less religious, if you do not observe halakha to the T, you are less Jewish than somebody who does. Yes, this is a proven opinion, right? And many polls have proven this. All right. In fact, if you're not religious, you're not really Jewish. And this allows, by the way, the very Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, who are as modern as anybody else, to say, we're the bearers of the real stuff, the whole stuff, the straight dope. Nah, I don't think so. But that's another story. Okay, in the US Census, we are literally not allowed, as it were, to define ourselves as ethnically Jewish. We can define ourselves as Jewish religiously, yeah? And if we want to make a case about our ethnicity as being Jewish, then we have to write it in. The option, Jewish ethnicity, is simply not there. This, again, is an external matter. It's a matter of how the census authority regards us, but I think it's part and parcel of this divorce that I'm talking about. Crimes against Jews in this country are tracked according to religion, not according to ethnicity. So if somebody spray paints the wall of, God forbid, of this shul, with "Free Palestine, F you Jews," then it's a religious crime. Everybody's upset. If instead of that they put "Free Palestine" on your car, it's not a religious crime, arguably, right? And I don't know, it's a political crime, it's a matter of freedom of speech, you're out of luck. It is a crime in the sense that they're violating your property, but it's not because of you. It's because you have a different political opinion. It's as if I were to write, F Trump or F, Kamala Harris or something like that. Okay, this goes to the internal makeup of the community. The social organization of American Jews is primarily voluntary, and it's very parochial in the sense that it's based on denominational and congregational life. There's no elected leadership. In a kehillah, the leaders, believe it or not, in the Middle Ages were elected. They weren't elected from everybody. Yeah, they were elected out of a class of propertied men with some social standing, but they were elected, and they rotated amongst themselves, but it was a much more demotic form of government than among the non-Jews, Christians, Muslims, whatever. Are our leaders elected? When somebody says, "I am the head of the conference of major Jewish organizations," who elected that guy? It's usually a guy, by the way. Nobody did. Yeah. So whom do these organizations represent? I propose to you, in rather polemical terms, that they represent a plutocratic form of government. Yeah. You donate money, so you get a chair at the table. I'm not a gazillionaire. I'm never going to be at that table. I'm going to be a supplicant to that table. Please give me money. The university doesn't give me any money. If you want our programs to thrive, please give me money, okay? And they're very nice. They'll give me money because they're responsible people, because they like to put their names on the walls of shuls and so forth. But it's not democratic. Democracy is what Jews had in Poland. where they ran elections. They ran party slates, secular, religious, Zionist, anti-Zionist. This was actual popular politics. Okay. Again, the structure of Jewish life is very much guided by religious congregations and denominations. This is why, for example, often when Israelis come to the United States and they settle here, they end up attaching themselves to one or another denomination, de facto, or congregation, right? Those of you who are Israeli may have something to say about this. That's not by chance. It's because that's the way things work here. I'm from Mexico. When I came to this country, I was enrolled in a Jewish school, and by my indigent parents, the school was nice enough to give them half a scholarship. And I was immediately asked by the other kids, are you Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox? I didn't have the slightest idea of what they were talking about. Why? Because in Mexico, Jewish life is not congregational, it's not denominational, really. The differences there are ethnic, just as they are in Israel. So for me, a more logical question is, are you Ashkenazi? Are you Sephardi? Are you Mizrahi? Right? Okay. Secular Jewish organizations, let's say the ADL, they have quasi-religious elements. I don't know if any of you sit on the local boards or whatever, but what happens is usually, not usually, but very often, a rabbi will come to give some sort of invocation. Oh, by the Lord, no, we pledge ourselves, no. Okay. This is actually a very interesting combination of what you might call church and quote-unquote state. Okay, but it's not a given. All right, American Jewish religious life functions like what some scholars, some sociologists have called a symbolic ethnicity. In other words, Jews feel it in their bones that they're an ethnic group. They feel kinship amongst each other. They have experienced life in ways that are more or less continuous. And yet, the environment does not give them the language and the proper format for expressing that ethnicity as an ethnicity. So what do? They translate it into religious terms. Why religious terms? Because they're legal. Because everybody will tell you something about the Establishment Clause, that the government of the United States cannot force you to believe or to do X, Y, and Z in terms of your religious life. Another reason for the religionization of Jewish life in the United States has to do with the meaning that words like tribal and nationalist have been given here. If you use words like tribal or nationalist, you're usually understood to mean something like chauvinist. By chauvinist, I don't mean sexist. I mean somebody who believes that your kind is better than other kinds of people. All right? In other words, you believe you're superior by virtue of what you are, not who you are. Now, I hazard that tribal does not need to have a negative connotation. Tribal means tribal. It doesn't mean tribalist. Nationalist doesn't necessarily mean, Nazi or ultra-nationalist. It simply means patriotic, right? But in common discourse, nationalist has a very bad name. White nationalists. Oh, gotta watch out for those jerks. Well, yes, I agree, but they're not just nationalists. They're not ordinary patriots. They're ultra-nationalists. They're racists. Okay. Notice the degree to which American Jewish life is constantly translating itself into Christian terms, right? Hanukkah is very often understood to be a kind of analogous holiday to Christmas, right? That's why the poor Jewish kids have, for generations in this country, been trotted out in front of the class to be asked, okay, so little Yankele, tell us about Hanukkah. Well, we celebrate Christmas. Well, Hanukkah was about the oil. Okay, so Judeo-Christian values. Judeo-Christian values. How many of you have heard of Judeo-Christian values? Name one Judeo-Christian value. Okay, that Jesus was Lord? What? I mean, what are we talking about? Sorry? The golden rule. So the golden rule, okay, I agree with you, is a biblical concept, right? It's embedded in the Tanakh. Do you have to be Jewish? Do you have to be Christian to uphold the golden rule? I don't think so. So I think this has taken sort of a life of its own. And there are ways in which the nomenclature, Judeo-Christian values, serves to paper over a great deal of variety and difference. For example, notice the view of this is a very famous halachic discussion. What happens if you are with a peer of yours in a place where there's no water? And you only have one flask of water. You know what I'm talking about? Do you know this? Yeah. Okay, so maybe you can correct my characterization of this. So what happens if you just have one flask of water? Okay? Do you share it with your peer? Do you surrender it entirely to your peer? Or do you take it for yourself? The typical Christian answer is you give it to your peer and you sacrifice yourself, right? The answer of Rabbi Akiva was you save yourself. Yeah. So why? I mean, again, can we talk about Judeo-Christian values? I think we can. Yes, we can abstract key principles which, not coincidentally, are rooted in first century Jewish life in the land of Israel. But to speak of this sort of glibly it's just a way to make nice. It's a way to make good politics. Yeah. Yes, yes. For them, it makes more sense, I think, than for Jews. Yeah. Yes. Right. Correct. Well, right. Yes. Correct, and you're absolutely right. They're conscious of the filiation, right? And those who are the most, let's say, philo-Semitic, for lack of a better term, are very conscious of the fact that they see themselves as a grafted branch onto the healthy body of the Jewish tree or something like that. But you know, that has, you're right, it has a very different valence for Jews. Jews are internally oriented. Our culture is not really for everyone. We accept that there are others, right? I shall be, no, how does it go? I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods besides me. Not that the other gods don't exist. They're there. They're for the other folks. It's just that we have our own, and we owe special responsibility to this guy, or this entity, because he's the one that freed us from Egypt, etc. So it's a very different conception. And I think Judeo-Christian value serves as an integrative vortex, but it's not historically. Look, I'm a historian, so I quibble about these things. Yes? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Yes, look, I don't pretend to be an expert on Nostra Aetate or its application. I would say the following, that this is, of course, an intra-Christian concept that's part of an intra-Christian a debate about who we are. Yes, who are we, right? And it so happens that Jews are, you might say, part of that by virtue of the subject, and they have made strides toward some sort of, mutuality and so forth. But I don't think that that's sort of, I don't think that's a very natural position to be in. Certainly because it's very new. I mean, it's only 1965, right? Yeah. So it's not. It's again. It's something that is Christian driven. All right. Sunday schools, interfaith dialogue, Jewish clergy. I'm sorry. Last I heard, rabbis were lawyers, not clergymen. Okay. Jewish seminaries. Really? Is a yeshiva called a seminary? Okay. Rabbinical roles. They play the guitar. They lead rituals. No, I mean in the traditional synagogue, you don't see that. They don't even lead services at all. The shaliach tzibur, the emissary from the public, is the one that leads. Okay. Messianic Judaism. Does it occur anywhere else in the world other than in the United States? Yes, in Israel, but it is very much grounded in American Jewish life and the vagaries of of contact with Christian evangelism. Okay, so all of these things speak of a tremendous disassociation, in my view. Now, what is the bottom line? To be, you might say critical, is that according to the very famous Pew survey of 2013 and 2020, humor is more important than community, is more essential to Jewish identity, according to American Jews. The Holocaust has to be remembered, but there's no other aspect of Jewish history that deserves that, apparently. In other words, we are who we are because the Nazis got us. The number of American Jews who can have a simple conversation in Hebrew is minuscule, even for kids who have gone to Jewish day schools. 1 to 2 million Jews, or people of Jewish origin, let's put it this way, people with at least one Jewish parent say, we are not Jews. Okay? It's a rate of assimilation that is stratospherical and unprecedented in Jewish history. We're talking about a multi-millennial history. 78% intermarriage rate among non-Orthodox Jews, and within that intermarriage, the children of intermarriage are predominantly not Jewish. If they're Jewish in a way that is very, very untraditional. In other words, yes, I'm Jewish, but I'm also Christian. I celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah. There's a lot of Tanaim are rolling in their graves. Again, the notion that religion is definitive, right, is very, very prominent in American Jewish life. Tikkun Olam has been presented to me as the point of being Jewish. How many times does the word Tikkun Olam occur in the Siddur? Any Siddur, Reforms, conservative, Orthodox, whatever. Arguably none, right? Some say that, in the Aleinu, Letaken Olam, blah, 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 that's Tikkun Olam, right? I say that that's a mistranslation. I'll leave that for later. How many times does the word Jerusalem or its analogs occur? Zion, Jerusalem, the city of David. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So does that tell you something about traditional Jewish values? I think it does. Tikkun Olam is all well and good. It's not the point. Certainly, it's not presented as part of an ideology, like we believe in doing this. No, it's mitzvot. Now I get to the younguns, yes, to Amitai and his generation. So for many of them, not for Amitai, because he's got one Israeli parent, one Israelified parent, so it's different for them. But for a lot of them, the BDS paradigm is basic. What is the BDS paradigm? And I'll finish with this, with a very sort of provocative theme. BDS in many Jewish contexts and in many non-Jewish contexts means what? Boycott, divestment, sanctions. In other words, stick it to Israel. I don't mean that. I mean bagels, davening, and Seinfeld. What do I mean by this? I mean that Jewish identity, modern non-Orthodox Jewish identity in the United States, is translated very often in the terms of youth and the life of youth as a series of Ashkenazic ethnological traces, right? Bagels, lox, yeah? And if you don't have latkes for Hanukkah, what's wrong with you? How can you be Jewish? Well, because I'm Sephardi? Okay, davening. Okay, this is the idea that being Jewish is kind of the same as being pious, and if you're not very observant, then you're not really Jewish. And this, of course, opens the way for the pious to say, we own Jewishness, guys, yeah? Therefore, you guys are just going to be our gophers. You're going to go to war, like, full disclosure, like my son, who's in Gaza right now. You guys are going to go to war, and we're going to study Torah, and that's going to protect the country, right? It's going to protect the nation, not just the country. Seinfeld. This is my shorthand for the idea that Jews are essentially funny, sardonic, and rather petty and marginal characters in their own history, that they're here to poke fun at the rest of the world, to be the sidekicks, right? While the real protagonists, yes, the non-Jews are the ones who are serious, the ones who are very... Do you ever notice how in the movies of, let's say, of Woody Allen, which is not familiar to everyone, The Anglo-Saxons are always the most serious people. They're serious to a fault, right? But they also suffer. They really suffer. They have tragedies happen to them. The Jews are funny. They're ridiculous. Why is that? Anyway, I'm way out of time. I didn't even get to half of this, but thank you for listening. I can open this now to questions, comments, concerns, complaints, pushback, you name it. Okay. So, any outstanding complaints? Yes. Yes. Okay. Frame it however you wish. Mhm. Yes. Very good. Very good. Okay, so this is how we should get positive, right? You reminded me of something very, very important. This session is intended for Shavuot. And what is Shavuot? Well, historically it was an agricultural holiday, right? You brought your first fruits to the temple, and those served as your taxes, really. They weren't just there to be sacrificed to a deity, they were there to sustain the priesthood and to signal your support of the state, yeah? But eventually, when the temple fell, the inheritors of cultural authority, over the course of many centuries, created a different Shavuot. Shavuot, which was meant to commemorate the giving of Torah. And this, in a sense, became a kind of a synthesis of a lot of very important rabbinic principles. That fundamentally, we have a culture that is transmittable, that is learnable, that is eminently textual, and that is open to interpretation and reinterpretation through time. In other words, that not everybody is going to look at the text in the same way. Now, I don't mean to overemphasize the notion of textuality, because I think there's a mistake in believing that, for example, that some kinds of biblical laws are statutory. Okay? For example, many people ask themselves, why on earth is there so much blood and gore in the Hebrew Bible when the Ten Commandments say, thou shalt not murder? How can then God turn around and say, murder not just the Amalekite soldiers, murder the children, murder the livestock, leave nothing behind? In fact, do you remember why King Saul was sort of, demoted and treated like dirt? Because he didn't do that, because he allowed his guys to take loot rather than destroy the loot. Yeah? So how does this jibe, not jive, as many of my students say, how does this jibe with thou shalt not murder? Lo tirtzach, or al tirtzach, or whatever. Does it? Well, sorry? Yes, that's one answer. In other words, the order to destroy the Amalekites was to kill them, not to murder them. But arguably, you might say, as a rabbi might, that if you kill a child who's not holding a weapon, then you're murdering the child. And so where does that leave us, right? I'm not saying I prefer that interpretation or anything like that, but the point is that it's a murky territory. So one answer is what you just gave. Another answer is to say, look, biblical laws that enunciate, that articulate broad principles are not like, the speed limit in this zone is 35 miles per hour. And if you go 36, the police guy can stop you and give you a ticket. No. It's sort of a broad principle that is enshrined in let's say, in the archives of state, but is actually not going to be used by the ordinary street-level judges. The ordinary street-level judges have their own, let's say, customary law that they're using. And that is why we have, even in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, we have references to the elders and the laws that they had inherited from their elders and so forth. So this is one way around that conundrum. I'm not saying it's the best one or the only one, but yes. What was your question, Michael? Sorry. Oh, how do you act upon? Okay. Okay, so I got as far as saying that this is about Matan Torah, the granting of the Torah. So you have to ask yourself a number of questions. Not you have to. I think it's wise to ask oneself a number of questions. What on earth is this? What do I mean, Torah? Right? Do I know it? Have I read it? Yeah, I may know a couple of stories. Yeah, fine, but have I read them as an adult? Have I made up my own mind about this? And if I have made up my own mind, of what relevance can this be to me? This is not an easy question because, look, the Bronze Age is not the age of TikTok, right? But at the same time, I think we owe it to ourselves as owners, as inheritors of this culture, to ask ourselves these questions. And then to say, well, what is it that I value in this that makes sense to me, or that may make sense to me, that I can discuss with people who are younger than I am, people about whom I care, people whom I assume or I wish remain Jews, as I understand being Jewish. So this is primordial, okay? And I say this as a guy who was raised, Chiloni, very unobservant, very much in the non-American mold, right? Because in the United States you have liberal congregations and you have conservative and Orthodox congregations. Where I grew up, there's only just sort of like a run-of-the-mill Orthodox, and then there's people who are very religious and not religious who go to the same congregations. So, so I think there's a lot of value there, a lot of plumbing to do, and thank God, you belong to this shul, and it's a place where a whole armoire is full of volumes of the Tanakh and other canonical sources. So just jump in. You can't swim without jumping into the water, so that's the water right there. And to the degree that younger people see you doing this and understand it, and understand that you're doing this because it matters to you, and they hear you talking about this, they will be receiving a very important message. They may disagree with you entirely. They may say, "Oh, this is garbage. I don't understand it. I don't see what's in it for me. You're just crazy." Okay, still, there's a point at which you have to demonstrate who you are. And if this matters to you, then by all means, read it, discuss it, argue with it. It's yours. Yeah. So, I don't know, does that help? Yeah. Sure. Yes. Correct. It's actually, yeah, correct. And I would say, look, even if you have to say, look, I didn't do this when I was your age, or I didn't understand this when I was your age, that's valuable as well. It may not have the effect that you wish, but it still is a recognition of your own values, right? What they are now. Today, thanks to you, Michael, I sat with these lovely, lovely young congregants, 6th, 7th grade or thereabouts, and I thought, wow, the future, I felt very good. The future is safe, okay? Why is that? Because I see that they're engaged, because I see that they have a lovely and very age-appropriate, you might say, sardonic disrespect for their elders. At the same time, you can tell that they're very bonded with their elders. They're very bonded with their elders. They value what their elders are to teach them, and when they're ready to fly the coop, as the saying goes, they will be ready, okay? I have a 22-year-old, my only son, and when he was growing up, I thought, I don't know what's going to happen with this kid. I mean, he's so different from me. He's drawn to so many different things, and he's beyond irreverent. He's just downright hostile. You say it's blue, and he says, no, it's green, even though he knows it's blue. It turned out more than fine. He's in many ways my model, my hero, and he has a very different life, but the core values are there because he knows what I value, and he's taken those values and he's done with them what he will. So great point, great question, Michael. Rabbi Michael, it's lovely to say that. I haven't said this publicly before. Anything else? I'm sorry, I've kept you over time. Okay. So what I was going to show you is this slide in which, having presented all the foregoing, I posed a question, right? What if a young Jew is not religious or observant? Like the ones with whom I met today. They're reasonably, they've gone through B'nai Mitzvah ceremonies, they are part of their synagogue, youth group, et cetera, et cetera. But what if they're not, right? like my son. What does he or she have left as a solid basis of Jewish identity in America? And by solid, I mean more than just ethnological traces and the Jews are funny or Jews are just victims of the Holocaust status. Secondly, is religiosity in a moralistic universalistic key, that is to say, a kind of deracinated tikkun olam, enough for them, especially now that Jewish particularism is heavily stigmatized as anti-progressive? Right? Now that, that having any kind of positive reaction to the word Israel is seen as such a sin in the eyes of many of their peers, what's to keep them, I don't know, anchored within the fold? Do they have enough from Seinfeld to resist the kind of the frontal assault that they're undergoing? It's a good question. I know from personal experience from the students that both Michael and I had the privilege of, in a sense, shepherding through their college years, that some of the answers are very good, and some of the answers are not. And yes. Thank you guys for coming. Yes. Yes. I would agree, and that's partly why. Thank you for that. I think the Taglit program, the Birthright program, is successful precisely because it changes the narrative. Now, there is a problem in that it is heritage tourism. It's not a very deep immersion. It's a very sort of, let's say, episodic immersion, and it's sort of like a shot of adrenaline. But once the adrenaline subsides, then what? You know, so. For many years, the likes of Michael Steinhardt and others have been looking for programs for the parents and follow-ups in the United States. So that's very important as well. But I agree that being in Israel changes the dynamic. I have to tell you, the fact that I have a son in Israel means a lot, of course. I mean, he's my only son, and my wife and I bit the bullet and signed for him to be a combat soldier, so it's not easy. But I have to say that maybe I'm just trying to talk myself into this, but I'm uniquely comfortable in Israel, right? Having been there many times. Last time I was there on a sabbatical, and I go very often, and I lead students. We have a summer program in Israel at Arizona, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been there a lot, and I feel comfortable in a way that I don't feel comfortable here. Not because things are hunky-dory, they're not. They're actually quite awful. You mentioned that, you know, some American Jews may not like the government of Israel. Oh my gosh, Israelis don't like the government of Israel. Many don't, many do. But it's not easy, right? And there's a war, and I've been in shelters, and, you know, it's tough. But there's something very vibrant, and I think it's very important to see Israelis lead their lives, their everyday lives. Israel is not, as I keep saying, is not a cause. It's not a geopolitical issue. It's a country. People live there. People of very different opinions and very different ethnicities and very different religious outlooks and so forth. It's very healthy to see it as a normal place in many ways, a unique place to be sure. But so is this country unique, right? We are living through very dangerous times here in the United States, arguably, and yet we're not all immigrating, right? And the same holds for Israelis. This is a country that holds value to them, and again, in what's personal, it makes me comfortable in a way that just talking about Israel abroad does not. So, very good point. Okay, and again, this is not about agreeing with policy X or policy Z. It's about agreeing with the existence of the place and what the place actually represents as a polity, as an expression of Jewish collective will. Right? Okay. Should we stop?
Hi, friends. I want to make sure y'all can get some dinner, but if you feel nervous about it, please don't, because everything's running on Jewish time, not just this. Okay? No, it's okay. So what I think we can do is sort of, we can stay and chat a bit if you want to chat. I'll make sure you get some dinner. We can go get some dinner and chat, but I think we can just sort of informally continue this conversation. But to formally conclude, I just wanted to thank Dr. Graizbord again for coming here, for representing for coming all the way from Arizona, where he is the director of the Jewish Studies Department. And you know, by the way, all these things about modeling Lador Vador, we didn't pay him. Well, actually, we are paying him to say that. But I hope it's a reinforcement from an academic perspective of the values of not just being Jewish, but doing Jewish, that the Rabbi Nico, have really been trying to discuss with our younger generations here. So anyway, thank you for joining us, and thank you so much, Professor, for being here.
Oh, okay, I was going to take your hand.
Okay.